Congratulations, you clicked on this video because you are thinking about getting into Warhammer 40k for the first time. And I can tell you, as someone that has been playing games my entire life, literally worked at GameStop for over a decade and sold video games for money, I can tell you, you are making one of the best gaming decisions of your life. So what I'm going to do today is talk to you about what I would do if I was at GameStop and trying to sell someone on Warhammer 40k, how I would get them to invest on a specific army. So I'm going to break everything down as simple as possible. And if I convince you to pick up one of the armies that I recommend today, let me know in the comments below. Let me know which one it is. And if you have any questions, leave it down below because I can make videos for that in the future too. So how to choose your first 40k army, right? That's the question that you want answered today. We're going to answer. So how do we choose? You know, generally in this space, when people talk about Warhammer 40k armies and what they should pick, people just say, oh, just play Space Marines, or just play this army, or just do that. To me, it's not. We're here because we want to play 40k, right? And we want to have fun. Like, I can eat ice cream, but you know what's really important? The flavor of ice cream that I choose. So the reality is, a lot of people would say that you should use the rule of cool, which means that you're looking at an army, it fits your style, you like the way it looks, so you want to play that one. And let me tell you something, there are so many armies and a lot of them look cool. So the rule of cool to me doesn't necessarily apply because there's just so many cool things. So how are you still going to narrow things down to one? So what we're going to use is, to me, is the most important thing. We're going to be talking about play style. Play style meaning how each army plays on the table so that you can decide whether that's something you would like to be a part of. Now, when we talk about play style, specifically with this first one over here, which is going to be the balanced play style. You see, we have Space Marines over here on the left and Chaos Space Marines on the right. This play style, what balanced means, and understand, let me say this, every single army in Warhammer can technically have a balanced play style, which means that, like, just because an army that I have is not necessarily good at shooting doesn't mean I can't build an all shooting list. What this means is, like, every army can kind of play however you want to play them. That's a part of the fun of the game. But these two armies in particular, within Space Marines and the Chaos Space Marines, you have the ability to not necessarily excel, but you can, it does not matter what you put together, they're going to play above average. So the reason why this is cool is because you get to play Space Marines the way you want to play Space Marines, the Chaos Space Marines the way you want to as well. But there is a cost associated with that because you're going to have to spend money in relation to the play style that you want. So for you to choose either of these two armies is to say that you want to play the game in a certain kind of way. And I'm sure you can do a lot of that research yourself, but I'm just making this as general as possible. So if you want a balanced army to do whatever you want to do, if you want to have that freedom, you pick one of these two. And their defense, they tend to have, if you can see, this power armor over here, which makes their ability to block shots and defend themselves average or above average at times. Doesn't mean they're bad. They're not great either, but they're just average at it. So they're pretty tough. The next thing that we have here is hyper aggro. And I call these hyper aggro armies because these armies in particular fight with their fists a lot. It is what they are good at. So we have the World Eaters above my head. We have the Blood Angels over there. We got the Orcs and the Black Templars. Now, each of these armies, I'm going to tell you right from the get-go, especially when you're playing Orcs, the game is decided within the first 1 or 2 turns of the game. I'm going to repeat that. When you play these armies, generally speaking, the game will be decided in the first 1 or 2 turns of the game. You're either going to destroy them really quickly, or you're going to get destroyed very quickly. Let me tell you something. It is very fun. It is extremely exciting. It is like all of the best parts of the game happen right away, and it's invigorating. It's really fun to play, but there are two sides to that coin. So just be aware. But there's nothing like picking either of these armies. What you're basically going to do is put your models on the table as far forward as you can. And you're going to be like, I hope I go first, because if I go first, I'm going to run really fast and just punch everything into oblivion. Now, orcs tend to be a bit weak in the way that they are able to stay alive. Like we mentioned earlier about the two armies that we talked about. They have power armor. Black Templars, power armor. Blood Angels, power armor. World Eaters, power armor. So they are pretty average at defending themselves from attacks. Whereas the Blood Angels, the Sanguinary Guard, this model that you see over here actually saves really well. So if you want an army that's a bit more defensive and hyper aggro, you're going to want to pick an army that has these power armor over here. The orcs, instead of having individual models that are good at saves, they'll put 20 orcs inside one brick instead versus 5 in the other bricks over here, which kind of offsets that ability where they're unable to defend their life total. So you get more bodies because they tend to be weaker, but it is incredibly fun. So looking at what we have next over here, we have fast, very fast, which means that these models move across the table very quickly and deal a lot of damage. Emperor's Children just released, so we have to keep in mind that the model range for this army is going to be very minimal because they are literally brand new. They just came out a couple months ago. And then we have the Eldar, which are elves, and Drukhari, which are elves, which means that like you could poke them and they will explode. They have high damage. You move across the table really fast with these models. So like the Space Marines that we'll look at, like Emperor's Children, may move, one of these models may move 6 inches across the table. Eldar, we're talking like 12, which is really cool. And this is actually my favorite playstyle to play in the game, by the way, because I can hide behind a building, wait for someone to move in a specific spot that's actually pretty far away from where I am. And then what I can do is I can fly all the way over to the spot where I want to deal damage to them. I can hit them, and because I do a ton of damage, I just obliterate their life. And then I have an ability, usually there's an ability with these armies where I can be like, if they target my model with an attack, I can activate an ability to just move them behind cover. So I get to move, shoot something, and then get out of the way and keep my models alive. And then at the same time, force my opponents to move into a certain spot where they're going to try to shoot that model because they have to try to. And then move, which then sets up my next shot, which feels horrible when you're playing against it. But I'm telling you, it's super fun. But because of that, if your opponents do have the ability to shoot at them, they're gone. I mean, they are glass cannons. Like they have no defense. Emperor's Children, power armor, average defense, literal no defense. Just keep that in mind. Next that we have over here is high damage combos. Okay. These are for the people with big brains. When you play these armies over here, the Sisters of Battle or Deptus, Sororitas, and then Thousand Suns, when you play these armies, it's about making sure that you're picking units that synergize with one another. So that you say, this gives me this buff, this gives me that buff, that gives me that buff. I can do this on this turn to do that, to deal 17,000 damage to whatever I want. That's the Thousand Suns. That's how Thousand Suns feels. When you play Sisters of Battle, it's similar, but they have this ability where you get to essentially, instead of rolling dice, you get to roll dice throughout the game as things are eliminated. And then instead of rolling, let's say you need to roll a 4 to land an attack. I can just take a 4 from my pool and substitute it for the roll, so I automatically pass, which leads to a lot of damage later on inside the game. So it's kind of unfair, I guess, but it's just what the sisters do because they have faith, and faith allows them to break the game, which is fun. Both of these armies over here tend to be at the top of the meta, generally speaking, just because their abilities tend to lead to very powerful plays. Like, I mean, like, there's nothing in the game that can survive the high damage combos that these armies create, which always tends to allow them to be competitive unless they nerf these things into oblivion, which can happen. Just be aware. But everything goes through its ups and downs inside Warhammer, so it's just the reality of the game. So we have the next one is board control. These are horde armies. You must also keep in mind, though, these are armies that you could also play completely differently. They don't have to be horde armies. You could just play, if you're playing Astra Militarum, you could just bring 1,000,000 tanks on the battlefield and have no individual soldiers. But what I see, the way people generally play them, is to put a ton of models on the battlefield and control the board, right? So if we're thinking about chess, like, I can take a pawn and move my pawn in front of my opponent's pawn. And when the pawns are sitting in front of each other, they're basically stuck. Like, they just can't move anymore unless they get a diagonal attack. They're just kind of stuck in that spot. So when you're playing these armies, it's about moving models. You have so many that you're just going to move them across the table. And if your opponents want to get to a certain spot on the table, they have to go through all of the models that you put there to get there, which basically means a lot of times they don't want to do that. They'll move around the table where you want them to go. And a lot of the times when you're forcing their movement and you're forcing the way that they have to play, you're essentially taking their turn for them, which leads to just controlling the game. You have to be able to sit there or stand there at the table and be like, I'm putting all these models here because I want my opponent's models to go over here. This model over here is that my opponent has is going to obliterate all of my models. So let me just put all of these things in front of it so it deals its massive damage to all these little dudes over here instead of dealing its massive damage to my important models over here. And a lot of times you play these games, your entire army gets obliterated. Like, you're left with literally nothing, but you've scored so many points because you've controlled the entire board the entire game that you just win because there's just nothing. Your opponent, there's not enough time for your opponent to score enough points to come back into the game. So Tyranids are good at that. Chaos Demons, I think, are one of the best armies in the game right now. Astra Militarum, always one of the best armies in the game because they have those really hard-hitting tanks. And the Tyranids have these monsters that make it more difficult for your opponent to shoot and hit the little dudes that you have. And you can bring some of them back to life, which takes this thing that feels really bad where your opponents can shoot into your models, kill them, and then you can just bring them back to life, which just feels horrible. And it's fun. And then we have defense. I think this is the last one that we have for today. We have the Custodes, Death Guard, and the Necrons. These models are known for having incredibly high defense, which basically means that it's difficult for your opponent to destroy your models. And they each do it kind of in a different way. Whereas the Necrons, like I just got done talking about with the Tyranids and coming back to life, the Necrons just do that by themselves. So you can destroy Necrons, but then the Necrons just come back to life, and it just feels horrible because there's just, you can put 20 Necrons of these dudes inside one brick, and then you're like, all right, opponent tried to destroy 20 of them. You know, they may end up taking down like, what, maybe like 8 of them, and then 5 of them will come back to life, so technically they only killed 3. And it feels horrible, but it's really good, and their defense is really good. Necrons are always competitive in the game. The Death Guard are defensive in a different way. They're not defensive in that their stats are really good. They're defensive in that they make their opponent's shots worse. So if you look at this picture over here, there's just this cloud of flies and disgustingness. And if you can think of the worst smell you've ever smelled in your life and you can multiply that by 1,000,000, that's what the Death Guard smell like. So it's difficult for your opponents to fight into the Death Guard when they're being like just doused in this horrible smell, which makes their aim worse. So like if I need to roll a dice on a 4 to land the shot because they're close to the death guard, if you're within a certain range, it turns into a 5, which makes it more difficult for your opponents to land shots, which inadvertently make the death guard feel like they have high defense. They have a lot of debuffs, and they could also use those debuffs for offense instead of the defense, but that's just a whole other conversation for another day. And then we have the Adeptus Custodes, probably the cheapest army to build if you want to save money, just because the Custodes are basically walking tanks. They're just tanks. Custodes never die. They just never die. I'm telling you, if you want to play an army where you just have like maybe 5-6 groups of models that never die because their defense is so high, it's the Custodes. And the armies tend to be super small in relation to other armies, just because it's not fair if they had a lot of Custodes. Their defense is too high. They are generally always very competitive. They are generally also always a melee based army, so they do best when they're fighting with their hands in close combat. So it's also a slightly difficult army to play because your model count is so low, and if for whatever reason you do end up losing some Custodes, it is horrible because you already have a low model count, and by losing models, it really makes it difficult for you to score points and win games. So something to keep in mind when you're building those defensive armies. But it feels super good to just see your opponent, those like remember when we were talking about the 1,000 Suns earlier, and like this is just incredible damage and they're just gonna one shot. These are the armies over here that would survive the one shot combos from those armies. So keep that in mind. That's the type of defense we're talking about over here. So these armies are no joke, okay? And that's pretty much it. So to me, there's a lot of other armies, a lot of other things that I left out in this video for a reason, because I think that the things I talk about today are the things that are the most important. I think they're the most affordable and that are the easiest to learn. And so what I would say is, if you liked something that you saw in this video, or particularly want to learn more about it, you can let me know in the comment section below, and I can make a video just diving deep from a noob's perspective, just to make everything as simple as possible so that you can feel more comfortable purchasing models and getting into the game of Warhammer 40k. Okay, whenever I end these videos, I always say the same thing. Always remember, eat healthy, okay, work out every single day. Most important, you guys can remember to believe in yourself. All right, peace out, people.